Okay. So guys, today we are starting with environment and ecology. Again, from the month of April and May, the same months. So before we proceed with environment and ecology, can you guys tell me which paper covers environment and ecology? GS3. Okay. So there are good number of topics there. Generally there are 4 or 5 broader topics which are mentioned in GS3, but those topics are very vast, like environmental conservation. When you say environmental conservation, it has almost everything related to environment. Then pollution, degradation, international summits, reports, alright. So we will cover environment and ecology with the same approach how we have done IR. So the first topic for today's discussion is Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Have you heard of this CBD, Convention on Biodiversity? What is this? Like, what is CBD? Any idea? Convention on Biodiversity? This CBD is one of the biggest convention in order to conserve biodiversity. Just for example, have you heard of UNFCCC? United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. UNFCCC is the biggest convention in the field of climate change, to tackle climate change. Similarly, for biodiversity conservation, this CBD was signed. I will give you a brief background, but what is this Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework? I will come to this as well, but before that we will understand that why this topic was in news. So first of all, there was a symposium organized by University of Arizona highlighted the concerns about Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework (GBF) and its potential impact on particularly on India's indigenous tribes. Now there are two, three things here. First, you need to understand that what is this. Then you need to understand under which framework it is working, and then you need to understand that how these convention will have an impact on India. Like for example, if I say climate change, India is the third largest emitter of CO2 or the greenhouse gases, but the per capita emissions are very less. So there is an obligation on India to reduce the greenhouse emissions. But can the developed countries force us to obtain certain restrictions on our country? Like can they force our industry to follow certain norms? So there is a huge separate debate to that. Same thing will apply here as well. Any convention will have some domestic ramifications or domestic implications as well. So we will understand all these three things one by one. So first, the 15th conference of COP, like COP is nothing but annual meeting where they are meeting to discuss the future of those on that convention. Like COP 27, COP 28 just has happened in the month of December. COP 28 of UNFCCC. Here I am talking about the annual COP of CBD. So this annual COP took place under the Biodiversity Convention on Biodiversity under Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was adopted. It includes 4 goals and 23 targets. This biodiversity conference was concluded in Canada's Montreal. Now, if the meeting was happening in Montreal, why this name Kunming was there? First, we need to understand this. Kunming basically is a city of China, and this summit took place somewhere around in 2023. Now, this summit supposed to be happened in China, but in early 2023 there were COVID outbreaks which were happening in China. Like you remember those new variants that were taking place. So as a result, this summit was shifted to Montreal, Canada, and that is why when the final framework was signed, the name was given as Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework. Everyone understood this much? Moving ahead, the first part of COP took place in Kunming, China, and reinforced the commitment to address the biodiversity crisis in Kunming Declaration that was adopted by 100 countries. Now, before coming to Kunming, let us understand what is CBD. Like the COP 15 is happening, but under which larger convention? It is a meeting of this convention. So, if we go back into the history, like, can you guys tell me what was the transitional movement when the humanity on planet Earth realized that there is a need to tackle climate change and environment? Can you tell me that transitional phase? ऐसा क्या हुआ था पास्ट में जिसकी वजह से there was a sudden discussion at the international level to tackle climate change? Discovery of ozone hole, okay, but इससे पहले भी बहुत कुछ हो चुका था. Discovery of ozone hole was more in 1980s, more prominent in 80s, but उससे पहले भी बहुत कुछ हो चुका है. Stockholm Conference, like Stockholm Conference is considered to be the first international conference, all right, where the world came together to sit and discuss on environment. The Stockholm Conference. इसके बाद जितने भी environment related summits आप आज सुनते हो was the result of that Stockholm Conference only. अच्छा, why Stockholm Conference held? उसके पीछे अलग reasons है. You will discuss all those history and international conventions in your environment and ecology. This is nothing to do with current affairs, but core environment and ecology. So उससे पहले भी क्या क्या ऐसे events हुए जो कि आदमी को force करा, humanity को force करा कि we need to come and discuss the climate change and environment and related aspects. So similarly, there was a debate, like if you remember Earth Summit, when UNFCCC met for the first time, 1992, yes or no? Rio de Janeiro, the first Earth Summit, which is also known as the first COP of UNFCCC. So उसी time पर बाकी areas में भी discussion हुआ, like disaster management, like biodiversity convention. So the first meeting came into when they met was in 1993. This was a convention. At that time it was ratified by 196 nations. What does this convention talks about? It sets out the guidelines for the country to protect the biodiversity and ensure sustainable use and promote fair and equitable benefit sharing. What does these 3 points means? First, all the guidelines which are required to conserve your biodiversity. Like for example, can you guys tell me any act in India that helps us to conserve biodiversity? We have a Biodiversity Act of 2002, which is based on the principles of these conventions. ठीक है, Biodiversity Act, like have you heard of Wildlife Protection Act? Schedule 1 species, Schedule 2 species, these are some prominent areas which are asked in your prelims exam. Like they will give you a species. Every year now this question is coming. Species based questions. At least one question is there. Like where you have to guess that what is that species. Like which phylum or which sub area that species belong to. The question remains simple, but the names of those species are at times confusing. Like even this year there was one question, right? So to ensure sustainable use and fair and equitable benefit sharing. How does biodiversity and fair and equitable benefit sharing is related? How do you understand this point? When I talk about biodiversity conservation, इसका लिंक कैसे बनेगा फेयर एंड इक्विटेबल बेनिफिट शेयरिंग से? Any guesses? Like sustainable use, biodiversity, this protecting the biodiversity, ये तो simple points है. What is this? Promote fair and equitable benefit sharing. क्या समझते हैं आप इससे? Any guesses? Okay, one point could be maintaining the stability, sustainability of the ecosystem. Okay. Guys, biodiversity does not confine to just the animals and the related species. It is also related to plants, flora, fauna, both, as well as, have you heard of GMO? Genetically modified organisms / genetically modified crops. This is another set of a discussion. Yes or no? So there are some places where genetically modified crops are being researched. We are like, as climate change is happening, don't you think this climate change is impacting food security? Like every year, one or the other crop, the price gets skyrocketing. Last year it was tomatoes, like right now the vegetables are again, the prices are rising again. Okay, slowly and slowly. Why? Because we have seen the extreme heat outside, it has impacted the produce. So how we gonna match the food needs and food productivity? So as a result, we are doing many research in this area. Have your biology or biotechnology teacher has touched on GMOs? बात हुई है साइंस एंड टेक में अभी इस एरिया की? Genetically modified crops और इस सब के, you understand the pros and cons and all those areas. So basically this convention talks about on the same lines. Like for example, BT cotton, BT brinjal. Have you heard of golden rice? What is so special about golden rice? It is added with a gene of vitamin A plus other micronutrients as well. So generally when we eat rice, what do we get? What do we get from rice? Carbs, largely carbs. But what if eating the same rice can give you other minerals as well, like vitamin A, other vitamins and other essential minerals in the body? This is one aspect. Imagine country like India where so much population is dependent on the PDS system. Then we have the problems like malnourishment, malnourished kids. Now if we can inculcate this golden rice at such a large scale, अगर हमने हर गरीब घर में golden rice पहुंचा दिया, don't you think it will tackle not just hunger and poverty but other issues like malnourishment and all those things, like child wasting, child stunting, ये सब सुना है, anemia, etc., etc. So don't you think the benefit that we get from the golden rice, or let's say America is researching in the area of golden rice, do they have the responsibility to share the knowledge what they have researched to other countries such as developing countries like India? So from this discussion, can you now understand, promote fair and equitable benefit sharing? अब समझ आ रहा है कि किस तरह का benefit sharing की मैं बात कर रहा हूं. Next, this CBD aims at achieving a historical deal to halt reverse biodiversity loss on par with 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change. Like we are losing biodiversity in different areas. Like nothing is safe. Have you heard of IUCN Red List? Almost every year this red list is updated. That means more and more species are entering into the extinct category. विलुप्त हो रही है species. That means we need to conserve these biodiversity. Like your basic understanding from ecosystem. In our nature, everything is connected. Food chain, food web, have you heard of those things? Like basic principles in school time. If you remove any of the part of that food chain, the complete food chain can collapse. Yes or no? So biodiversity loss is a threat. So this CBD aims that we need to conserve or reverse the biodiversity loss at par with 2015 Paris Agreement. And today everyone read about Paris Agreement as homework. Thoda sa just flip through, search about what are the provisions of Paris Agreement. Have a quick read. Add this as homework for today. Okay. Coming back to this, the CBD meet at regular intervals and these meetings are called as Conference of Parties, and what we are discussing in the topic is COP 15, the 15th Conference of Party, that is Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Now, this convention in 2000, a supplementary agreement to this convention was also signed and adopted, which is known as the Cartagena Protocol. इसी का एक supplementary convention under CBD was signed. It was Cartagena Protocol. It came into force on 11th September 2003. What was the objective of Cartagena Protocol? It seeks to protect biodiversity from the potential risk posed by living modified organism resulting from the modern biotechnology. Now to understand this, I had a little discussion on GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Let's say, what is, like if I ask you a basic question, what is the advantage of a genetically modified crop? If I ask you this question, basic question, एक genetically modified crop को use करने का advantage क्या है? Productivity high होगी, कैसे? Very good. It can survive in harsh climate. That means we will induce a gene that will make that plant to survive in less moisture, or also we can induce that crop with a gene that can survive certain insects, pest resistant, etc., etc., or you can think it in different direction. Now, what if a crop has become pest resistant? That means in a way you will be hampering the population of some insects in the ecosystem. अगर आपने एक crop को pest resistant बना दिया, what will happen to the insects dependent on that crop? Don't you think their population will reduce? And now you understand that even the population of one insects that reduce in the ecosystem, it will have an adverse impact on the complete cycle. You remember I've talked about locust attack. So why these locusts are moving in such a bulk from one place to another? In search of food only? Because earlier where they were getting the food, they were incapable to get whatever required amount. So that's why they started moving to new places. So Cartagena Protocol specifically talks about the risk posed by living modified organisms resulting from modern biotechnology. एक supplementary protocol under CBD only. ठीक है, इसको क्या बोला? Cartagena Protocol. Then there is one more protocol, Nagoya Protocol. These Cartagena, Nagoya are the places named after the cities only. Nagoya is in Japan and Cartagena is in, I guess in Canada. Cartagena's place is in Canada or some European state. You can check. I cannot remember right now. So Nagoya Protocol, it talks about access to genetic resources and fair and equitable sharing of benefit arising from their utilization. It was adopted in 2010 in Nagoya, Japan in COP10, and it came into force on 12th October 2014. Nagoya Protocol talks about the same thing that I have earlier mentioned. Fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from their utilization. Whatever benefits the others are getting from biodiversity research, everyone should get access to that benefit. Alright? So Nagoya Protocol, Cartagena Protocol, two supplementary protocols or supplementary convention under CBD. Now we have reached till 2010. Okay? It only applies to genetic resources that are covered by CBD, and to benefit arising from their utilization also covers traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources that are covered by CBD and the benefit arising from its utilization. Now, after 2010, there was one more meeting in COPT 10 only, which held at Nagoya. At that time, it was adopted a 10-year framework for action of all countries to save biodiversity. यानी 2010 में they met and they decided that what framework all the countries will follow for the next 10 years, completing by 2020. 2010 से 2020 तक. Like, for example, have you heard of this term? This term is your homework as well. Intended nationally determined contributions. ऐसा कुछ सुना है? अरे ये तो सुना होगा, मैं अभी आपको बताऊंगा, आपने सुना है, that is for sure. If you guys are reading about environment तो आपने ये पक्का सुना होगा. पहले ये लिख लो, all those who are writing. This is your homework, by the way. You will read about this today. गाइज ऐसा कुछ सुना है? पंचामृत, ये तो सुना वर्ड होगा, रिलेटेड टू एनवायरमेंट. ठीक है, पंचामृत. अब कुछ याद आया क्या है? ऐसा कुछ सुना है? नेट जीरो. नेट जीरो टारगेट सेट बाय गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया. व्हेन इज दैट टारगेट? 2070. वेरी गुड. 2070 तक we will become net zero. What do you mean by net zero? Zero carbon emission. Net zero means zero carbon emission. The overall carbon emission will be neutral. Like whatever carbon emission we will be doing by 2070, we will adopt certain technologies that can capture all those carbon emission which is going in the air. This is one of our INDC. ऐसे 5 और टारगेट्स है. इंडिया हैज सेट a target of 5 INDCs by what year? 2030. ये 2000 वैसे तो ये पेरिस एग्रीमेंट में इसका डिस्कशन शुरू हो गया था, बट एवरीवन एक्सेप्टेड देयर INDCs by 2018. 2018 में हमने INDCs को एक्सेप्ट करा. एंड बाय द वे इंडिया हैज ऑलरेडी अचीव्ड 2 of their INDCs by 2022. Like one of the INDC, जैसे एग्जाम्पल के लिए, इंडियन रेलवे विल बिकम नेट जीरो by 2030. Everyone understood this? The overall carbon emission capacity will be 45%. That means whatever we are producing, we will reach at such a level that we are taking 45% of the carbon from the environment by 2030. So ऐसे 5 targets we have selected. You read about all those 5 targets for climate change. This is a separate thing that I have discussed, nothing related to this convention. But क्या समझाने के लिए ये था कि every decade, or it depends on convention to convention. So they met in 2010 to work for what will be the targets for next 10 years. इन targets का नाम क्या दिया गया? HE targets for biodiversity. There were, it provided for a set of 20 ambitious and yet achievable collective targets which are known as the HE targets for biodiversity. 2020 जा चुका है. That means you need new targets for the next decade. So the new targets for the next decade came from none other than your Kunming COP, Kunming-Montreal Protocol. Got it? And this is why Kunming-Montreal Protocol becomes important. Now you understand the heading, Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It targets the next 10 years. All right? So ये बैकग्राउंड जानना जरूरी था. मैं सीधा शुरू कर देता कि 2021 में हमने टारगेट्स अडॉप्ट कर लिए तो हो सकता था कि कुछ कंफ्यूजन रहता. So now you understood a little background and the present scenario, that why we are understanding this. Don't worry, I'll give you time to write this. Abhi just focus on this thing. अच्छा, India enacted Biodiversity Act. Sorry. India enacted Biodiversity Act in 2002 for giving effect to its provision of CBD. So in order to achieve those targets, हमने पहले ही CBD को Biodiversity Act को हमारे देश में पास कर दिया था. By the way, when was your Wildlife Protection Act enacted? 72. And when was your Stockholm Conference held? 72. So don't you think it was not a coincidence? Indira Gandhi ji went there in that summit, and then she realized that we also need some framework to preserve our environment in our country. And for the first time, as soon as she returned, their government passed this Indian Wildlife Act of 1972. फिर उसके बाद एनवायरमेंट प्रोटेक्शन एक्ट ऑफ 85, एंड देन उसके बीच में एयर एक्ट, वाटर एक्ट, बहुत सारे एनवायरमेंट से रिलेटेड एक्ट्स आए हैं. ऑलराइट, एवरीथिंग वाज सिंक्ड विद व्हाट इज हैपनिंग इंटरनेशनली, बिकॉज ऑल दीज कन्वेंशंस makes it obligation on the governments to form or to enact such acts. Okay, coming to the next slide. Now, when this Kunming Biodiversity Protocol was, this global framework was signed, what are now the targets? What will be the targets for next 10 years? Now understand the topic now. We will first discuss that what are the targets for this 10 years, and then actually these targets were signed last year. Okay, so you add Kunming-Montreal CBD protocol as homework again, like read about this a little in depth. Add Kunming-Montreal for all those who need spelling. Kunming-Montreal ग्लोबल डाइवर्सिटी फ्रेमवर्क. इसके बारे में पढ़ के आना थोड़ा सा एक्स्ट्रा, ज्यादातर चीजें मैंने बता दी है क्लास में ही. नाउ सी हियर, दिस हैज 4 goals and 23 targets. Got it? So you have to read, focus more on these 4 goals and 23 targets. अभी तक जितना पढ़ा है ये सारा प्रीलिम्स ओरिएंटेड है, अब थोड़ा मेंस ओरिएंटेड स्टफ आ रहा है. ठीक है, विल राइट दिस. अभी सिर्फ कुनमिंग वो लिख लो. अभी हम आगे बढ़ते हैं और बात करते हैं व्हाट आर द की टारगेट्स key targets of this global biodiversity framework. First, 30 into 30. What does this mean? We need to restore 30% of the degraded ecosystem globally on land and sea by 2030. 30 degraded ecosystem. So, like we know that we are cutting forest, we know that we are polluting water, marine water, so ecosystems are getting destroyed almost everywhere. So we need to restore those degraded ecosystem, then conserve and manage 30% of the areas, terrestrial, inland water, coastal, marine by 2030. Do you know what this conservation and manage means? It means converting their status as protected areas. How you conserve a forest? By declaring that forest as protected areas. Now what are protected areas? I will not go in depth, but एक superfluous idea दे देता हूँ. Have you heard of national parks? Have you heard of wildlife sanctuaries, tiger reserve? तीनों में क्या फर्क है वो आप एनवायरमेंट एंड इकोलॉजी में डिटेल में समझेंगे. बट नाउ कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड ऑल ऑफ देम आर प्रोटेक्टेड एरियाज. सो व्हाट शुड बी द टोटल प्रोटेक्टेड एरिया इन एनी कंट्री? इट शुड बी एटलीस्ट 30%. गॉट इट? दिस इज वन मोर टारगेट. देन stop extinction of known species by 2050 and reduce tenfold the extinction risk and the rate of all species including unknown species. So we need to work on species extinction. We need to figure out what are the reasons which are leading to species getting extinct, and also we need to take efforts for all those species which are even unknown. Like you know this, that every year there is a new species that are discovered, or not one or two, like in thousands. Every year there are thousands and thousands species which are discovered. Okay, so we need to conserve even them. Like for example, do you know how much information that we have related to our oceans? Just 3%. Humans are right now familiar with 3% of the ocean. Rest 97% of the ocean is still unknown. There is so much discoveries in the ocean which are still going on. So don't you think there could be some species which are there in oceans, and ocean occupy almost 70% of the earth's landmass? So कितनी ऐसी unknown species वहां पर हो सकती है? और tropical rainforest or all these forests, even there we discover new species every time. Western Ghats, Indian Western Ghats is a prominent location where new species are discovered every year, and which at time becomes a probable question in your prelims. Any new species discovery can become a question. UPSC has asked questions from these areas. So extinction, reduce risk from pesticides by at least 50% by 2030, reduced nutrient lost to environment by at least 50% by 2030. These are some simple points. Reduce pollution risk and negative impacts of pollution from all sources by 2030 to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity and ecosystem functions. Guys, reducing pollution alone is not linked to this convention. It is linked to IUCN. UNFFC. Like pollution कम करने की बात तो हम climate change के लिए कर रहे हैं, but reducing the pollution linked to which is not harmful to any biodiversity and ecosystem will be covered here. See, nature is connected. Nature में pollution और biodiversity अलग नहीं है. Nature will have pollution will have an impact on biodiversity as well. So don't you think some portions of pollution will also be talked in here? यहाँ पर भी बात करेंगे. करी हुई है. Alright, so the other targets are reduce global footprint of consumption by 2030. Do you know what is global footprint? Ecological footprint? Any idea about this term? See, footprint in general, what do we understand by footprint? When you are walking, you are leaving some of your remains behind. So what humanity is doing, we are processing the nature at a much faster speed than its speed of regeneration. Yes or no? We are consuming the earth at faster speed. Have you heard of this Earth Overshoot Day? सुना है ऐसा कुछ? Add this as homework. अब इससे रिलेटेड बहुत सारे डेज आ गए हैं. प्लास्टिक ओवरशूट डे, बायोडाइवर्सिटी ओवरशूट डे, एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा. बट लार्जली आपको ये समझना है, बाकी सारे समझ जाओगे. गाइस, अर्थ ओवरशूट डे मीन्स दिस ओनली, दैट every year there is a day celebrated annually. वैसे तो बहुत सारे डेज होते हैं, आपको पता है, every day will have something or the other, but there is one day that is celebrated which shows that at what speed humanity is consuming this earth. Every year, like every year when it passes, this day, Earth Overshoot Day, is decreasing. As in, there was a time when this Earth Overshoot Day was celebrated in December. Right now it is celebrated in July. क्या मतलब हुआ? That we are consuming the earth, like we have to consider earth as one unit. We have consumed our earth by July only. उसके बाद जितना भी हम earth पर extraction करेंगे या जो भी natural resources को use करेंगे, it is exceeding the capacity of the earth to regenerate. Are you understanding this? Consider this year as one unit and earth as one unit. Consider this year as one time frame, consider this earth as one unit. So in order to consume complete earth, when I say consuming complete earth, it means using all the resources which are being generated on the earth. What are the resources? Air, water, natural resources, man-made resources. So when we are consuming the earth at some speed, so it has to be consumed throughout the year. If it is consumed throughout the year, it means whatever we are consuming, the earth is able to regenerate. But if I consume the earth in first 2 months, what I will do in remaining 10 months? I will create a burden on the nature. Are you getting this? So as it is moving closer, Earth Overshoot Day is moving closer to the January, that means our capacity to consume earth is increasing. Or in other way, don't you think if we consume more from the nature than its regeneration, we will leave certain things behind, like waste, like pollution, like biodiversity loss. So whatever we are leaving behind is known as global footprint. Not matching the regeneration capacity of the earth. This is what do you mean by global footprint. So what does this target says? Reduce the global footprint consumption by 2030. How much we are consuming the earth, the speed should be reduced. How you can reduce the speed? How you can reduce the speed? By using alternatives, sustainable, basically sustainable development, like utilizing the earth in a very justiciable way. आप ऐसे अर्थ को एक्सट्रैक्ट करो कि आपका काम भी हो जाए और फ्यूचर जनरेशन भी सिक्योर रहे, you have least footprint behind. Are you getting this? So reducing the global footprint of consumption by 2030, reducing overconsumption, waste generation, and halving the food waste, the amount of food that we waste, even that has to be reduced. Even that is also part of our ecological footprint. In any wedding function, guys, or you ignore wedding functions, if you calculate in a day, there will be some ecological footprint that you guys are having. Only talk about food. There will be some or the other amount of food that you waste. Yes or no? Imagine there are 30-35 students which are there, including online students. Each day you are wasting, let's say, 500 grams of food. Imagine how much food that this class is wasting. And it is happening everywhere. I am also included in that. I am not blaming that you guys are only the one who waste food. Even there are conditions in which even it happens through me as well. So imagine how much the impact will be at the global level. Have you seen those parties where food is thrown for fun, and there are countries who are, where children are depriving basic amenities, Africa, or these days Gaza. Okay. Then sustainably manage the areas under agriculture, aquaculture, fishery, forest, sustainability, increase agroecology and other biodiversity friendly practices. Agroecology means scientific agriculture. Alright, all those things that can make our agriculture sustainable. Take climate change through nature-based solutions, reduce the rate of introduction and establishment of invasive alien species by at least 50% by 2030. This is a topic in itself, invasive alien species. I will elaborate. I have added one topic related to this separately, that is coming in the upcoming slide. So usko wahan elaborate karunga. Then secure safe, legal, sustainable use and trade of wild species by 2030. Do you know, guys, any activity that generates the maximum amount, or can you tell me which activity globally generates maximum black money? जो इलिसिट तरीके से, गलत तरीके से कमाए जाने वाला धन है ग्लोबली, वो सबसे ज्यादा किस एक्टिविटी से आता है? स्क्रैप से? नहीं भाई, कबाड़ी वाले अमीर होते फिर। ड्रग्स, फर्स्ट इज ड्रग्स, सेकंड इज ट्रेड ऑफ वाइल्ड लाइफ। पूरे वर्ल्ड में this activity generates billions and trillions dollars of income. Okay, for example, have you heard of whale vomit? 1 kg of whale vomit cost in crores. Whale vomit is used in your cosmetics and other industrial applications. In crores, 1 kg of whale vomit in crores. In order to capture that, they kill the whale, just for the vomit of the whale. Alright, so, and then you know what are the other animals and how they are indiscriminately killed. Okay, then green up urban spaces. It is also part of protecting the biodiversity. Greening up of urban spaces, like for example, one example of biodiversity and urban spaces I would like to give here. Like in any major city like Delhi, right now you guys are in Delhi for more than a month, everyone, and you guys are coming from your own city as well. Now tell me what birds you can see in Delhi. Like how many birds you have seen in Delhi in last 1 month? Have you ever thought in that angle कि मेरे आसपास नेचर क्या है? हाँ, स्पैरोज आपको दिखा? एक ही दिखेगा, वो पिजन। Crow very rare. The populations of crows are reducing to very drastic level. बहुत रेयर सिचुएशन में क्रोस दिख जाएंगे आपको, और ज्यादातर द गार्बेज हाउस और इन सब के पास दिखेंगे। पिजन्स, just one bird which is left in most of the urban cities. What about your area, your cities? Same? You can find some other birds as well? Chalo, maybe things are better there, or maybe you are not from a very heavily crowded metropolitan city. दिल्ली जैसे शहर या मुंबई जैसे शहर से हो, अगर आप हो तो मुंबई में भी आई गेस यही हाल होगा। एनीवन फ्रॉम मुंबई? ऐसा ही है कुछ? नाउ कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड हाउ अर्बन स्पेसेस एंड एक्सपेंशन ऑफ अर्बनाइजेशन इज ऑल्सो लिंक्ड टू बायोडाइवर्सिटी? जानवर के लिए, जानवर अगर हम देखें अर्बन एरियाज में तो दो ही मिलेंगे, या तो डॉग्स या दीज पिजन्स। उसके अलावा और कोई जानवर आपको दिखेगा नहीं रोड पर। काउस टू एन एक्सटेंट अर्बन एरियाज में, अब काउस का भी बहुत ज्यादा बचा नहीं है, बिकॉज वी हैव अगेन देयर इज इलिसिट थिंग्स गोइंग ऑन रिलेटेड टू काउस एज वेल। तो काउस भी अब बहुत ज्यादा बची नहीं है, बट हाँ आज भी बाहर के आउटस्कर्ट्स में आपके शहरों में काउस वगैरह दिख जाती है, बट उसके अलावा कोई और एनिमल, अच्छा वो काउस भी एक सेपरेट इशू है। दोज आर अबैंडन्ड काउस विच आर रोमिंग ऑन द रोड्स। अगर वो यूजफुल होती तो वो वहां नहीं होती, ठीक है। सो ग्रीनिंग अप अर्बन स्पेसेस इज इंपॉर्टेंट, ओके, दिस इज ऑल्सो वन ऑफ द टारगेट। देन अदर मेजर टारगेट्स आर मनी फॉर नेचर। द बिगेस्ट प्रॉब्लम इन द वर्ल्ड in order to tackle environment, when I say environment, everything comes, biodiversity, climate change, pollution, ecosystem, the main thing is money. हर कोई बड़ी बात कहता है, हर कोई चाहता है कि सब कुछ अच्छा अच्छा हो, क्लीन एनवायरमेंट हो, बट पैसा कहां से आएगा? The biggest debate in tackling climate change is nothing but money, climate finance. ये एक नया टॉपिक बनता जा रहा है। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, हैव यू गाइज स्टडीड COP28? COP28, COPs are very important guys every year. COP28, India participated. Where did this COP28 held? UAE. Very good. What were the India's contribution to COP28? Add COP28 as homework, everyone. Read about this. मैं COP28 पिक करूंगा, बट वो किसी ना किसी करंट अफेयर्स मंथ में करंट अफेयर बनेगा, तो वहां उससे रिलेटेड कोई न्यूज मैं डालकर फिर उसको डिटेल से डिस्कस करूंगा। बट फॉर नाउ यू रीड अ लिटिल अबाउट इट, और जब फॉर्मली आएगा तो मैं डिटेल में डिस्कस कर दूंगा। देन इट विल बी अ सेकंड रिवीजन फॉर यू गाइस, ठीक है। उस टाइम पर सेकंड रिवीजन हो जाएगा और कुछ कंपोनेंट्स मैं ऐड कर दूंगा आपके लिए। ऑलराइट, सो मनी, ठीक है। अच्छा, इसी COP28 से मुझे एक और चीज याद आई। 2023 देयर वाज वन बिग ग्लोबल इनिशिएटिव, इनफैक्ट देयर वर 2 ग्लोबल इनिशिएटिव दैट वाज लॉन्च्ड फ्रॉम इंडिया। Have you heard of them? One is linked to biodiversity. Other is linked to tackling energy and pollution. But one, अच्छा, there are total 4 such global initiatives that has been launched by India till now. Indian oriented, India is the founder of that, and now it has become a global initiative. द फर्स्ट वन आपने जरूर नाम सुना होगा, इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस 2015 में करा था, सुना है? ये फर्स्ट इनिशिएटिव है। अब ये एक इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बन चुका है। सेकंड इनिशिएटिव भी हमारे टॉपिक से, एनवायरमेंट से लिंक्ड है, बट डायरेक्टली हमारे टॉपिक से लिंक नहीं है। उसका नाम है CDRI, नाम सुना है? कोलिशन फॉर डिजास्टर रेजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, ठीक है, मैं लिख देता हूं। ये भी इंडिया के द्वारा लॉन्च किया गया एक ऐसा इनिशिएटिव है जो कि अब एक ग्लोबल लेवल पर इनिशिएटिव बन चुका है। 2018 में हमने इसको लॉन्च करा था। व्हाट इज दिस? बेसिकली डिजास्टर रेजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, बेसिकली preparing the mitigation strategies to reduce the impact of the disasters। ऐसा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर बनाओ जो कि डिजास्टर रेजिलिएंट हो। डोंट वरी, इसकी बात हम डिटेल में करेंगे जब मैं डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट पढ़ाऊंगा। आई टेक योर डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट एज अ सब्जेक्ट, सो वहां डिटेल में बात करूंगा। इसके बाद जो थर्ड, ये फर्स्ट था, ये सेकंड था, जो थर्ड है वो हमारे लिए इंपॉर्टेंट है। वो 2023 में लॉन्च करा था इंडिया ने, और वो हमारे बायोडाइवर्सिटी से भी लिंक्ड है। हाँ, वेरी गुड दोस्त, बट ये चौथा है। द फोर्थ वन इज दिस ओनली, ग्लोबल बायोफ्यूल अलायंस। सुना है? इट वॉज पार्ट ऑफ G20 डिस्कशन। G20 के साथ G20 कंट्रीज के कुछ नेशंस ने ग्लोबल बायोफ्यूल अलायंस को ऐड कर लिया है, बट जिसकी मैं बात कर रहा हूं वो है ये इंटरनेशनल बिग कैट अलायंस। सुना है? याद आ गया होगा कईयों को। इंटरनेशनल बिग कैट अलायंस, it has now become a international, like it is right now trying to become an international organization। ये बिल्कुल, ये तीनों, ये चारों अपने आप में एक इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, दो तो बन चुकी है, ठीक है, दो बन चुकी है, CDRI एंड ISA। ISA तो UN रिकॉग्नाइज्ड इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बन गया है अब, ठीक है। इंटरनेशनल बिग कैट अलायंस क्या है इसके अंदर? We will try to revive all 7 big cats in their natural ecosystem। Have you heard of cheetah reintroduction project? चीता को हमने इंडिया में इन द वाइल्ड रीइंट्रोड्यूस करा है। तो 7 बिग कैट्स के अंदर आपके क्या क्या आ गए? टाइगर, लेपर्ड, चीता, स्नो लेपर्ड, लायन, पूमा एंड जैगवार। ये 7 कैट्स को रिवाइव करना इन देयर नेचुरल इकोसिस्टम इज व्हाट इज द ऑब्जेक्टिव ऑफ IBCA, इंटरनेशनल बिग कैट अलायंस, ठीक है। व्हाई? आई होप यू नो दैट ऑल दीज कैट्स, बिग कैट्स आर द एपेक्स कीस्टोन स्पीशीज। ये इंपॉर्टेंट स्पीशीज है अपने इकोसिस्टम की। सो एवरीवन अंडरस्टूड दिस? प्लीज इसको साइड में कहीं लिख लो, इसको भी पढ़ लेना। रीड ऑल 4 ऑफ देम। Write down somewhere in the side, ISA International Solar Alliance, CDRI, International Big Cat Alliance, International Big Cat Alliance and Global Biofuel Alliance। and Global Biofuel Alliance, International Big Cat Alliance, Global Biofuel Alliance। Okay, coming back to our discussion again, money for nature। The next key target is money for nature। The signatories aim to ensure $200 billion per year is channeled to conservation initiatives from public and private sources। So this convention aims to raise $200 billion, whether countries should contribute at least $20 billion of this every year by 2025 and at least $30 billion by 2030। So this is what wealthier countries means, the developed countries। उनसे एक्सपेक्ट किया जाता है कि वो ज्यादा कंट्रीब्यूट करें। क्लाइमेट चेंज में भी यही डिबेट चल रही है, लाइक इफ यू नो द डिबेट बिटवीन डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज एंड डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज, वहां पर भी एक ग्रीन क्लाइमेट फंड की बात की गई थी। एवरी ईयर इट वॉज एक्सपेक्टेड फ्रॉम द डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज दैट वो क्या देंगे, $100 बिलियन का मदद प्रोवाइड करेंगे टू ऑल डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज, बट टिल नाउ zero has been done. This was part of Paris Climate Accord. आज तक किसी ने पैसा नहीं दिया। और इनफैक्ट 2015 में जब पेरिस क्लाइमेट अकॉर्ड साइन हुआ था, 2017 में जब डोनाल्ड ट्रंप आए, वो तो भाई साहब विड्रॉ कर गए थे पेरिस क्लाइमेट अकॉर्ड से। He opted out that his country will not participate in Paris Climate Accord, although USA is the second largest emitter in the world. However, when Biden came, they rejoined this thing. ठीक है, उन्होंने वापस के पेरिस अकॉर्ड को ज्वाइन कर लिया है, but when it comes to taking out money, nothing has been done. Then big companies report impact on biodiversity. Under this, the company should analyze and report how their operations affect and are affected by biodiversity issues. Parties agree to large companies and financial institutions being subject to requirements to make disclosure regarding their operation, supply chain and portfolios. Do you know that even these companies are made responsible under this COP15, that they also needs to take initiative that how their operation is impacting the biodiversity. When I say company, not companies like Facebook. Facebook का, वैसे तो Facebook in a way will also have a impact on biodiversity, but largely यहाँ पर वो companies हैं जैसे जो forest extraction कर रही है, mining कर रही है, या कुछ infrastructure development कर रही है. Can you guys tell me how Facebook and these IT companies will negatively influence biodiversity? Cloud. How Facebook will, एक तो चलो हो गया emissions, what these companies do, वो तो हो गया, but उसके अलावा कुछ, are there any ways in which these IT companies do not just limit your thinking to Facebook, all these IT companies have a negative impact on biodiversity? Very good. E-waste. What else? Part of e-waste. Do you know these, like when we require more and more IT services, don't you think we are surrounding ourselves, when we are surrounded with more and more electronics, don't you think when we are surrounded with more and more of electrospectrum, like more bandwidths are around us, Wi-Fi are always there. Like, have you heard doctors saying this, that in order to have a sound sleep, you should switch off your Wi-Fi and mobile to airplane mode in order to have a sound sleep, because these electromagnetic signals can also impact you, and it has happened in the nature. One of the reasons that why the birds, the sparrow, their population are decreasing is these phone towers. The frequency and the waves that comes out from these phone towers, they cannot survive that. Okay, so in a way all these companies will have some or the other kind of impact on the nature. So there is a target for this as well. Then harmful subsidies. Countries committed to identify subsidies that deplete biodiversity by 2025, then eliminate and phase out or reform them. Example of this will be the pesticides, insecticides, weedicides that we are using. Like we all know the quality of fruits and vegetables that we are getting today is full of pesticides and chemicals. Yes or no? So don't you think we need to phase out harmful subsidies which which promotes these kind of pesticides and insecticides? Do you know? Pesticides, fertilizers, all these type of chemicals, some of them are subsidized from the government only. The government gives it at a lower rate. So all these subsidies that the farmers are getting in a way are harmful. Harmful from the biodiversity's perspective. Biodiversity में guys हम लोग भी आते हैं, हम लोग भी biodiversity का part हैं. They agree to slash those incentives by at least $50 million by year 2030 and increase incentives that are positive for conservation. Monitoring and reporting progress. All the agreed aims will be supported by the processes to monitor progress in future in a bid to prevent this agreement meeting the same fate as similar targets that we agreed in Aichi, Japan in 2010, which are never met. So some targets of Aichi last decade which were not met are taken again. National action plans will be set and reviewed following a similar format used for greenhouse gas emissions under UN-led efforts to curb climate change. Some observers objected to lack of deadline for the countries to submit these plans. INDCs that I have talked about, indented nationally determined contributions. समझाने के लिए I am picking that again. Now these NDCs, nationally determined contributions, it is on India that how we want to reduce pollution. It is, you have to set targets for yourself. Now, do you think that any country in such a scenario will fix a tough target for themselves? मान के चलो मैं आपको बोल रहा हूं कि you have to set your own targets to study for this exam. So the targets of each one of you will vary. If I say there is a daily target that you guys have to achieve, whether it is subject wise, whether it is, let's say, the number of hours writing, solving MCQs, everything, like these are the 4 things you have to do. Each one of you will set a separate target for according to your advantages and disadvantages. Same applies at international level. All these targets are indented with no deadline. ये सारे कन्वेंशन बात करते हैं पोल्यूशन कम होना चाहिए, बट कितने अमाउंट से और कब तक, nobody gives this deadline. For example, what is the net zero target of USA? Any idea? 2030 तक में कैसे पॉसिबल है? 2050. European Union and USA have set a target for 2050. China, what is the net zero target for China? 2060. And India is 2070. These targets are given to us by no one, but we have adopted these. Do you know, जैसे I have talked about NDCs में हमने कुछ ऐसे टारगेट्स रखे, कार्बन इंटेंसिटी कम करना, फॉसिल फ्यूल का यूज कम करना, एमिशंस को कम करना, ऐसे कुछ टारगेट्स है. देयर इज अ परसेंटेज अटैच्ड. डू यू नो चाइना हैज गिवन अ टारगेट दैट टिल 2030 दे विल पीक देयर एमिशंस. वो अपने एमिशंस को मैक्सिमम ले जाएंगे और फिर 2030 ऑनवर्ड्स वो एकदम ड्रास्टिक रिडक्शन करेंगे. ये एक तरीके से हो गया कि अभी मैं पोल्यूशन कर लूंगा इतना ज्यादा और फिर उसके बाद में एकदम हरा भरा हो जाऊंगा. ये चाइना ने करा, खुद से टारगेट दिया. ठीक है. सेम द वन सच इज देयर विल बी एक्शन प्लान्स. अच्छा, ये इसकी प्रॉब्लम भी है. लाइक राइट नाउ हम इसके आउटकम्स डिस्कस कर रहे हैं, बट व्हेन आई विल से द चैलेंजेस टू COP15 will be one such this, that some observers objected that there is a lack of deadline for the countries to submit these plans or these national action plans. Like we also have a national action plan for climate change, for biodiversity. We have to submit this to CBD. But till what time? Nobody mentioned. This convention does not talk about that. So what is India's progress? Very quickly, let us see how much India has achieved, especially in target 3, that is 30 into 30. What was 30-30? Protecting 30% of the forest by 2030. India right now has 22% of its terrestrial area and 5% of its marine coastal area under protected area network. So we have to achieve more area under protected. अभी 22% ही है under protected area. Are you linking why this topic was in news? In order to increase the forest areas under protected area, don't you think more forest will come under protected area and rules and regulation? तभी तो ये target 30% वाला achieve कर पाएंगे हम. And when more forest will come under protected area, what will happen to the indigenous people living there? Now can you relate that why this topic comes in news? वो स्टार्टिंग वाला जो तीसरा पॉइंट था, अब लिंक कर पा रहे हो? उस पर मैं आऊंगा, बट दिस इज इंडियाज अचीवमेंट. नेक्स्ट इज व्हाइल इंडिया शोज प्रोग्रेस इन एक्सपैंडिंग प्रोटेक्टेड एरियाज, concerns arise over legal definitions and diversion of these areas for non-conservation purposes. अब एक और होमवर्क है, और वैसे तो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीज है ये, बट आप कहोगे कि आज सब कुछ सर होमवर्क में ही दे रहे हैं, खुद कुछ नहीं पढ़ा रहे, क्योंकि मैं ये सब नहीं डाल सकता, क्योंकि मेरे को अप्रैल मई में कॉन्सेंट्रेट रहना है. ठीक है, फिर वो करंट अफेयर नहीं बचेगा. इंडिया फॉरेस्ट कंजर्वेशन अमेंडमेंट एक्ट 2023, ये अपने आप में एक बहुत डिबेटेबल एक्ट है जो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने पास करा है. थोड़ा सा डिबेट्स बता देता हूं कि क्या है. लाइक इसके अंदर गवर्नमेंट हैज रिड्यूस्ड द प्रोविजंस ऑफ एनवायरमेंटल क्लियरेंसेस. Like for example, any area which lies in 100 km from the border area, there the government can cut forest on its own. There is no environmental clearances required. Any area which is 10 kilometers of a security infrastructure like an army base or इट्स अ नक्सलाइट अफेक्टेड एरिया, वहां पर भी वो फॉरेस्ट को काट सकते हैं. देन एनी एरिया विच इज रिक्वायर्ड फॉर सर्विंग द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ पब्लिक एट लार्ज कैन बी कट और कैन बी यूटिलाइज एज पर गवर्नमेंट गाइडलाइंस. व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय सर्विंग पब्लिक एट लार्ज? लेट्स से गवर्नमेंट, ऐसी कोई न्यूज सुनी है? छत्तीसगढ़ में अडानीज हैव एक्वायर्ड अ न्यू कोल माइनिंग कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, महिंदरगढ़ डिस्ट्रिक्ट, एंड फॉर दैट दे आर कटिंग द कंप्लीट फॉरेस्ट ऑफ महिंदरगढ़. वो बहुत अपने आप में बहुत बड़ा एनवायरमेंटल इशू है. हमारी मीडिया उसको बहुत ज्यादा कवर कर नहीं रही, बट द विलेजर्स ऑफ दोज एरियाज आर प्रोटेस्टिंग अगेंस्ट दोज cutting down of trees. Now the mining contract, coal extraction, is serving the public at large because we need coal for our energy security, but on the other hand we are destructing the forest. So ऐसा नहीं है कि all these things under this act are concerns or are debatable. कुछ पॉजिटिव चीजें भी है, तो आप इसको पढ़ना. इंपॉर्टेंट एक्ट है बिकॉज फॉरेस्ट कंजर्वेशन एक्ट ऑफ 1980 को रिप्लेस करके हमने एक नया एक्ट लेके आए हैं, एंड दैट इज व्हाई इट बिकम्स इंपॉर्टेंट. सो इट एक्सपैंडेड द डेफिनेशन ऑफ फॉरेस्ट. अच्छा, इट इंक्लूड एक्टिविटीज सच एज कमर्शियल वेंचर्स, जू, इको टूरिज्म, रिफ्लेक्टिंग अ कमिटमेंट टू सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट. हाउएवर, सुप्रीम कोर्ट हैज issued a directive that require any proposal for establishing a zoo and safari within forest area excluding the protected area to receive prior approval from the court. इस एक्ट के अंदर गवर्नमेंट ने ये भी करा है दैट द गवर्नमेंट विल प्रमोट इको टूरिज्म. नाउ हाउ डू वी प्रमोट इको टूरिज्म? बाय जंगल सफारीज, बाय zoo and these type of activities. Now do you think safari is a positive aspect, or it is positive for a jungle, or it is rather negative, these jungle safaris and ecotourism? Right now the country like ours, it is more of negative. Like people use the jungle for, or use the safari for not proper like what it has to be or what it intended to be. Like yesterday only there was a news that I was reading. South Africa mein there were Indians, like South Africa also provides you safari, वहाँ तो बहुत famous है. Like whenever you go to Africa, सबसे ज़्यादा prominent चीज़ वही है the wildlife safaris. There was a video that came out that two Indian couples sitting in a jeep was touching the lion who was just roaming around. So उसमें बस ये इंडियन मेंटालिटी को टैकल करते हुए वो आर्टिकल था कि हाउ दीज इंडियंस बिहेव आउटसाइड. सो दैट आर्टिकल, दैट राइटर वाज राइटिंग दैट व्हेन यू आर आउटसाइड यू आर रिप्रेजेंटिंग योर नेशन. पीपल विल मेक अ इमेज दैट, लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, you guys are from Maharashtra. If any wrong behavior that you show in the class, don't you think I will have subconsciously, I will have this feeling that all students from Maharashtra are like this? You represent a state. Same way Indians, when they go out, they do all these things. Like people get down from the jeep, the rally jeep, for reels, for shooting videos, for all these activities. So a bad name comes to us. Same, have you seen the condition of Indian safaris? Like how much pollution we do. We do not have that civic sense to use public goods. For example, have you seen Indian Railways? ये examples मैं कुछ दे रहा हूँ कि how we utilize public infrastructure. So the government has this objective that they will promote more ecotourism, but it is largely detrimental. However, there is a Supreme Court case which is still going on, TN Godavaram case. Under this, there is one more issue that comes in Indian Forest Conservation Act. Do you know the definition of forest? The government says that only that parcel of forest will be covered in the Forest Conservation Act which is notified by the government in the government records. उसी को जंगल कहा जाएगा. But what if there is a patch of forest which is not notified under the government? You get the license to cut that forest on your own because वो notified नहीं है और वो Forest Conservation Act के अंदर नहीं है. ऐसे बहुत सारे forest है हमारे देश में. North East, do you think we have a proper record of North East forest or mountainous forest, the forest on the mountains? Okay, like one of the most debated project under which came into news was the Char Dham project. Have you heard of Char Dham project? This Char Dham project is very important for India, not just from the perspective of increasing tourism and connecting the dhams. It is strategically very important because under Char Dham project the government is building road infrastructure and other facilities near the China border. So that is also important, but this Char Dham project falls under this rule that any area which is in the first 100 kilometer of the international border can be cut easily. So on one end you have country's security, on other hand you have environmental. You remember that tunnel collapse last year, Uttarakhand? That was part of this Char Dham project only. ठीक है, वो टनल वनल क्यों बना रहे हैं वहां? इसलिए because that is important. Anyways, coming back to the other progress, other effective areas based conservation measures, India identifies 14 categories of effective area based conservation measures, that is including including citizen led initiative, but voluntary nature of their declaration raises question about their legal protection. This is a general point, nothing to be getting elaborated here. Now this slide is important. What will be the implication of forest expansion on India's indigenous tribe? This topic what we are doing from current affairs, one aspect was the GBF, Global Biodiversity Framework, that you understood. The second part was the impact of GBF on India's indigenous tribe. These type of content, you have to use it in your mains, like from where you will extract points in mains, these will be the topics. So the first implication will be forest, like what was the target under GBF? We have to increase forest covers. So forest expansion under GBF target may restrict traditional land use practices and livelihood of indigenous communities. Have you seen that movie Kantara? Although that movie has nothing directly linked with, yes, it is linked with nature's protection, okay, but you ignore the action and all those things of that movie. Have you seen that scene where the forest official trying to control the villagers in extracting the forest produce, and the villagers were laughing on them that how you can own this jungle belongs to us, we are using this for centuries, for generations. The people, there are tribes in our country which are dependent on the jungle for everything. So if you increase the area, forest area under protected areas, all those areas will come under rules and regulations. Like I hope you know what are the rules and regulations around national park. If you don't know, just giving you a brief. एक पत्ता भी बाहर नहीं लेके आ सकते आप किसी नेशनल पार्क एक प्रोटेक्टेड एरिया से विदाउट द कंसर्न परमिशन ऑफ द ऑफिशियल्स, एक पत्ता. एंड उनका क्या, जिनकी पूरी लाइफ डिपेंडेंट है, ऑल दोस पीपल देयर लाइफ आर डिपेंडेंट ऑन द जंगल्स. सो it may restrict the traditional land use practices and livelihood of indigenous communities, relying on natural resources, leading to increasing poverty, food security among the indigenous population. Yes, 84% of India's national parks were established in the areas inhabited by these indigenous people. आज तक जितने नेशनल पार्क्स हमने बनाए हैं, प्रोटेक्टेड एरियाज बनाए हैं, 84% are in the areas where these people are living. And meeting the GBF target will threaten their existence. Then other related instances, for example, upgrading initiatives such as Kumbhalgarh Wildlife Sanctuary in Rajasthan to a tiger reserve. This is the newest tiger reserve added. It could displace 162 tribal villages there. Expansion plan of Nora Dehi Sanctuary in Madhya Pradesh can affect 62 predominantly tribal villages. Notification for Barak Bhuban Wildlife Sanctuary in Assam poses a risk to Khasi, Dimas and other indigenous groups. These are some examples where new protected areas are creating problems. Acha, do not just link with the indigenous people, it is also problem for India's internal security. Now don't you think all these tribes which are affected from the movement, they will become vulnerable for all those anti-India forces? Extremist organizations can use them, and this is what is happening in Northeast. Northeast is already hostile. बहुत सारी जगहों में प्रॉब्लम चल रही है. मणिपुर last year was in news, although for different reasons, but it is in news. Mizoram, Assam, Meghalaya dispute, the border disputes between the states, all this can be linked to somewhere this only. एक link यहाँ पर भी है. Then preventing how India can utilize indigenous tribes in biodiversity conservation. What is the solution now? How we can match both the thing? On one end you have GBF, on other end you have indigenous tribe. We have to maintain both. What is the solution? Preventing cultural heritage through ecotourism. Supporting ecotourism initiatives which are led by indigenous communities, fostering cultural preservation and generating income. So we need to develop sustainable ecotourism. Tourism which can help them, which can give them alternative income. A standard example will be Wayanad Terrible Heritage Villages in Kerala, where the community-led ecotourism projects have not only boosted income but also safeguarded wildlife and empowered local communities. So, examples. Then integrating traditional and professional knowledge. Like again you can link it with many movies. Have you seen these traditional people have their own ancient knowledge which is being passed from generation to generation. How to use different plants, let's say for medicinal purposes or for other purposes. They know the nature. And if we say this, these tribal people, they live in complete harmony with the nature. Like, have you ever seen tribals impacting the nature negatively? There are some examples like shifting cultivation. Even shifting cultivation, what they practice is very controlled manner. We write this point that due to shifting cultivation, our forests are being destructed. But technically it is not shifting cultivation. Whatever these tribals do, they do in a controlled manner. Rather they worship nature. They do not worship the regular gods what we do, but they worship nature as God. So linking their traditional and professional knowledge, if you inculcate their knowledge in policy making, it will give you a manifold time conservation strategies to tackle your forest. So governments can leverage traditional knowledge of indigenous tribes like Khasi, Jaintia, which have rich tradition of protecting the sacred groves, areas of natural vegetation that are prevented through local taboos and sanctions. Sacred groves are those part of the jungles which are very pristine. वहाँ पर किसी को भी जाने नहीं दिया जाता है. Like can you trace those practices where we also offer like water to people tree, tulsi? These are some habits that we have inculcated as a part of our tradition. Sacred groves is a similar thing. जंगल का एक पार्ट जो कि बहुत ही ज़्यादा प्रिस्टाइन है उनके लिए, उसको ये ट्राइब्स बिल्कुल प्रोटेक्ट करके रखती हैं. इवन गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल recognizes these sacred groves. So integrating this knowledge with scientific surveys by institutions like Wildlife Institute of India can create comprehensive conservation plans. Promoting co-management models, ये बिल्कुल वही है. Like for example West Bengal joint forest management, where indigenous communities work alongside forest departments to manage protected areas. This leverages their knowledge and fosters a sense of ownership. Mix traditional knowledge and their knowledge of the government officials. Then what is the way forward? How we can improve this balance? Free prior informed consent. Whenever we are declaring a forest, ultimately cabinet takes the final decision. ठीक है, वैसे तो there are processes, like there are National Biodiversity Board, then there is Tiger Conservation Authority, Tiger Reserves के लिए वो decision लेगा, National Biodiversity Board decision लेगा, but ultimately all of these bodies are run by cabinet, and cabinet decides that whether to declare a part of a jungle as protected sitting in Delhi. सिटिंग इन दिल्ली दे आर डिसाइडिंग नॉर्थ ईस्ट के एक पार्ट को प्रोटेक्टेड एरिया डिक्लेयर कर देना है. डोंट यू थिंक इट इज अगेन अनफेयर? आपने यहीं बैठे बैठे कैसे डिसाइड कर लिया? अनटिल अनलेस यू हैव दैट ग्राउंड रिपोर्ट. सो you should involve more local communities. You have to take their consent. उनके consent से ये काम हो. So the Indian government upholding free prior informed consent, which is mandatory requirement before establishing protected areas on tribal land under Panchayat Extension of Scheduled Areas Act of 1996. So उनके पंचायत के through we will try to take their consent. Second, having a social impact assessment. इस टर्म को सुना है आपने? एनवायरमेंट इम्पैक्ट असेसमेंट सुना है? EIA. किसी भी बड़े प्रोजेक्ट से पहले आपको उसका इम्पैक्ट ऑन एनवायरमेंट असेस करना होता है. इट हैज स्टेप्स. यू विल डू दैट इन योर एनवायरमेंट एंड इकोलॉजी. इसी तरह देयर इज अ टर्म व्हिच इज नोन एज सोशल इम्पैक्ट असेसमेंट. व्हाट इज द सोशल इम्पैक्ट असेसमेंट? If there is a project going on, how it will impact the society. Example, have you heard of Narmada Bachao Andolan? That the people who are rehabilitated because of that project are still struggling. Let's say this patch is a forest and the people living here, you take the consent and you declare this as a forest or you cut this forest. You say that we will provide land to these people. We will rehabilitate them to another place. But what will be the cost of that rehabilitation? Let's say you give them 1 crore rupees to each family. वैसे तो इतनी बड़ी रकम कभी मिलती नहीं है. The compensation is very minimal. But can they survive on that compensation throughout their life? First question is this. Second, all they have done throughout their life is dependent on the jungle. Their livelihood was from the jungle. So once you have rehabilitated them to a new place, can they adapt to that new place? Ultimately, you will force them and their condition will deteriorate further. उनकी स्थिति और ज़्यादा खराब होगी. So what we need is a social impact assessment. इन सब चीज़ों को भी analyze करना है. So understanding the potential impact of the protected areas, following examples of Namibia's communal conservation programs co-management model that can establish for protected areas. So these are some examples that you can even quote in your exam. Case studies. Okay, all those case studies examples that I have quoted earlier, ये सब आपको fetch करता है, like how you can use these points. Each of these examples that you add in your exam will make your answer unique. When I say conservation of indigenous people, वो सारे जो basic points हैं वो सबके same होंगे. What makes your answer unique will be such examples. Okay, so this is why all these content is important. And the last point is aligning policy with international standards. So India must align the national policies with United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, principles ensuring that indigenous rights and knowledge systems are respected along with the sincere conservation efforts. In a way, sustainable everything. So before we move on to the noting down some important points, please try answering this. This is a question from 2018. Okay, how many for A, B, C and D? Okay, correct answer is C. This is part of your UN FFFC.